You want to know how we got this drive unit out of that Tesla? Stick around and find out.
Fixity Fix!
I'm jamming a screwdriver into the brake rotor and it's secured against the caliper. 32 millimeter nut here on the axle. Gonna do that on the other side now. Next on the rear, I'm going to drain the brake fluid from the calipers and then take off the calipers from both sides of the rear axle. It'd probably be easier for you to see this part if you'll just come around under the car. I'm gonna knock off this 11 millimeter banjo bolt to drain the brake fluid, open up the brake system. This would be a very different process if we were just replacing or repairing the drive unit. Since we're going to be harvesting this drive unit for use in a conversion, we're not going to leave the brake system intact. In fact, I'm going to just be selling these calipers off on eBay. Brake fluid out of here. Similarly, we're going to knock off the electric emergency brake. I'm going to keep this and use it in the Porsche. A couple of 16 millimonster bolts holding this e-brake in. It's a T45 holding the brake disc in. Let's get off this brake line. Gonna be a two-hander. I'll bring you back up here in a second. Next time I do this, I'm gonna power wash the whole car before I bring it into the workshop to tear it down. I always tell myself that before I restore a car, and get excited about it and start taking it apart to the point where it's too late. It was hard to see this in action, but I just took this nut, this 21 millimeter nut, off of the shock bolt. No need to take the top of the shock mount off, just the bottom bolt. Using a drift to knock out the rest of the shock bolt. We're going to give the other side the same treatment. All the steps are identical, but just on the other side. This is the differential piece of the small drive unit here in the back of the Tesla Model S. This step is optional, but I'm going to drain the fluid from the drive unit because I intend to crack this drive unit open before I put it into the Porsche and install a Quaife limited slip differential. 8 millimeters, Allen head. Out of habit, I'm taking off the fill plug first. And getting the transmission fluid all over the newly painted floor. Maybe that would have been a reason not to take the fill plug off first. If you haven't watched the channel before, the reason I take the fill plug off first as a matter of habit is because you always want to be able to get fluid back into a transmission or a differential before you drain fluid out of it. If you can't get fluid back in, don't take the fluid out. It's going to be a lot neater dealing with this thing when it's not full of transmission fluid. I'm going to reinstall these plugs finger tight, keep up with them after this finishes draining. Handy little storage shelf on this rear bash rail. Let's see about getting these wires disconnected. It's a T30. There's obviously no power connected to this thing. There's not even a battery pack in the car. If there were, you'd have to be really sure you had no current here. And you'd need to be wearing full 1000-volt PPE and using a different ratchet set. Just like a 12-volt car battery, these two plugs are different diameters so that it is very difficult, if not impossible, to connect the wrong lead and get it out of polarity. I'm going to wind these in pretty far just so I minimize the risk of breaking off the aluminum thread body here. Now, if I'm correct, we should be down to just 2 large bolts and 2 large nuts to be able to drop this whole rear drive unit along with suspension out of this vehicle. So you can see I've got a transmission jack secured to the motor housing for the rear of the Tesla. As far as I can tell, everything is unhooked that needs to be unhooked, and I need to zip out these two 20mm bolts on each side and then 2 20mm nuts. And I believe I can lower this whole assembly using the transmission jack. Let's give it a shot. And excuse me, they're 21mm nuts and bolts. Okay, well that's actually a bolt with a bolt on the end, not a nut. A little extra safety measure here, just in case anything goes awry. All right, that motor is free. That's pretty good progress for a day. If I'd been wanting to preserve the function of this motor and the entire motor cradle, it would have been better to have gone in under the rear seat, removed the rear seat, and disconnected these cooling line disconnects. It's just you grab both ends, squeeze, pull out 2 of them, and then disconnected this ground strap for the drive unit housing. I don't think there's anything else that couldn't be disconnected from the outside there. I was a little worried the transmission jack, the way I had it set up, wouldn't be able to keep this thing stable rolling out, which is why you saw me supplementing with jack stands and pinch weld stands. It turns out the transmission jack here did just fine. This is the 2,000-pound capacity Pittsburgh from Harbor Freight. I didn't really make any wood blocks or anything. I just sat it in a way where the jack supports would be in contact with the aluminum bars from the cradle rather than touching the drive unit anywhere. That seemed to do all right. I do have the cradle now resting on a couple of smaller jack stands, supplementing with the transmission jack. I'm going to leave it that way for the night and then commence to disassembling the motor unit from the cradle in the coming days.
That's much bigger than I thought.
Hey, thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Uh-huh.
Is that going to fit in the Porsche?
Well, only this part.
Okay.
These 3 pumpkins.
I'm going to send Dad a picture.
That's all that's going in the Porsche. So this has to come out of all of this cradle. And all this is suspension and axles. These axles are going to have to be modified. These Tesla axles are going to have to be joined to the Porsche axles to drive the Porsche wheels.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks again for joining us on Fixity Fix. If you found this content helpful, please consider giving this video a like and maybe subscribe to the channel, and by all means, share it with all of your friends, even your enemies. Hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon, and you will be notified when exciting new Fixity Fix videos drop about our EV conversion of our 1984 Porsche 944. See you next time.